Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Before we talked about a loose cracking spine, and today we're talking about what to do for a loose cracking spine. Before we talked about, and I held up some models of vertebra to show the causes and the foundations of what's going on with hypo and hypermobility, too much movement and too little movement. Today I'm going to talk about fixing it. So fixing a loose and cracking spine really has to do with understanding what our job is. And our job is not to make you more flexible in most cases. Our job is not to loosen you up. Our job is to make your brain, your cerebellum, and your spinal cord better able to coordinate all the micro movements in milliseconds of time of all the tiny little muscles that are controlling your vertebra. And you cannot hope to do that consciously. And so you can't learn to do it with the control of your brain. And you also can't strengthen your back by going to the gym and just getting on machines that strengthen your back muscles, because it isn't a matter of weak back muscles. In fact, when I treat power athletes and power lifters that have huge muscles, they're super strong. Their problem isn't that their back isn't strong. Their problem is that their back isn't coordinated on a multi-millisecond basis. It means that millisecond to millisecond, they don't have quick control and quick feedback that tells them how to tell all those hundreds of muscles in their spine how to keep those vertebrae locked together and when to let them go and when to let them move. And that happens at every vertebral level up and down your spine. So what these people need to do is they need to do exercises that make them call on subtle movements of their spine without conscious control of that. And so it usually looks like this. It comes from, very generally, this is ripped from the McGill and the McKenzie methods, which are marvelous. This is a modification of those. But the general concept is the idea that a person would want to lay on their back in a comfortable position with a nice pad under them if they need a pad. And they simply pick up their head. They simply pick up their head from a lying down position, lying on their back, and they pick their head up and they roll their head up, rolling it all the way forward as far as they can go. And what they're doing is they're looking for a point where they're weak or they're in pain, and they stop there and back off a bit to a place where they're not so much in pain. And they just keep doing this repeatedly with their doctor until they can figure out where the pain is and learn to hold their neck at that position right before the pain, but not with pain, for maybe 30 seconds. At first, it might be 5 seconds. Some of my patients that have bad neck problems didn't even know that they couldn't lift their head. They were laying down. I have several patients that were laying down, and as they tried to lift up their head, they realized they did not have the neck strength to pick their head up off the floor. And yet when they're upright, they could move their head fully and have no problem. But when they lay down, they could not pick their head up off the pillow. So that's a phenomenon that happens, and we really need to work on coordinating the movements. Now, after a while, we begin to turn the head and lift it up, and turn the head the other way and lift it up. And I'm going way too fast as I do this, but the general concept is that they need to be able to pick up their head and stabilize it and have all those muscles hold together and then let it go back. And as they do that, they'll begin to learn how to fire all those muscles at the same time. And it sounds like a very boring exercise, but it can be very useful. In addition, when they pick up their head, they may decide to pick up their pelvis too. So they're laying on their back with their feet on the floor and their knees bent. And as they lay there with their head here and their knees bent and their feet on the floor, they may bridge up and press up their pelvis, pushing their feet on the floor and lift up their pelvis off the floor. And so they're contacting the floor with their shoulders and with their feet, but their head and their butt is off the floor. And so as their head comes up and their feet and their butt comes up, they need to keep their pelvis level. And what will happen very often with people that have poor coordination, even especially in the strongest people, those power lifters that I talked about that are super muscular, they may not have the right coordination. And so as they pick up their head and then they pick up their pelvis, they may notice that one side of their pelvis just falls. And it may happen when they pick up their head, or it may happen when they turn their head one way or the other after it's lifted, or it may happen if they pick up one foot or pick up the other foot, all of a sudden the pelvis just crashes. And so the inability to coordinate unconsciously the head and the spine and the neck and the pelvis is a diagnostic and a treatment for these spinal instabilities. So these roll-ups that involve the pelvis, the head, the legs, can be graduated into by even further. The person laying on their back might lift up their head and lift up their buttocks, and then they might pick up one leg and they might extend the leg, straighten out the knee, and then bend the leg and then point it up and point it down. And as they move that leg through space, they're monitoring, and you're monitoring, as the doctor would be monitoring them, to see that their pelvis is staying level and that their head is staying up and not bobbing and moving. And so that stability is the first steps in beginning to learn how to have spinal stability. And we build on this. We do much, much more things with it. There's many more things we add to it. The next step is to be on all fours. A person would be face down on all fours like a dog or a cat on their hands and knees on a floor in a comfortable position with perhaps pads under the knees because it can be sore on your knees. And then what they do is the doctor will use a dowel or a rod of some kind, like an old a lightweight curtain rod made of aluminum, or a broomstick, or some kind of a long stick, maybe a yardstick or a ruler that's maybe 3 feet long, and you'd set that on their pelvis and or on their shoulders. So they're face down like this on all fours, and you ask them to do these Supermans where they might put one arm out and one leg back, and they might alternate this. And as they do that, if they don't have good coordination in their spine, you might see one shoulder drop or one side of the pelvis drop, and they're not level. And so as you see this failure of coordination of all these tiny little intrinsic muscles of the spine, you begin to see that they can't quite coordinate everything. So what you do is you slow down the exercises and you ask them to keep that thing level. Sometimes I have even shined a flashlight behind the person toward the rods that are on their shoulder and their back and their pelvis, so that they can see on the wall in front of them whether the rod is level, because they can't see it if it's on their shoulders or on their back as they're on their hands and knees. So I just shine a flashlight and they can see the shadow of the two bars, and they can see if they dip and fall. And so as they do their exercises like this, right, they do their exercises reaching forward and the opposite leg reaching back, they can look at the wall in front of them and they can see if the rod tipped or fell, and whether it's their pelvis or their shoulders. That's just a very basic way of beginning to teach a person how to correct these loose and grinding spine sounds that often go with terrible disc bulges and radiculopathy, and it's the beginning of how to heal them. These are some gentle exercises. You know, work with your doctor, but I wanted you to understand what they look like and what to expect when you begin to look at spinal stability exercises. It's not what you think.